Growing up as I did in church, as a preacher's kid, and knowing church your whole life and just being around church, when I looked at the thought of, well, how do I tell if someone really loves God or not? Well, this is how, as a child, and I say it that way because it wasn't right, but it was from a child's point of view. This is how I determined how people really loved God or not. I realized that we had 3 services that we offered as a church. And there was an 11 o'clock Sunday morning service, and there was a 6 p.m. Sunday night service, and there was a 7 p.m. Wednesday night service. And what I realized as a child was that the numbers of people got less with every service. That the Sunday morning service might have 200, and Sunday night might have 60, and Wednesday might have 20. And so in my mind, the way that you determine what a good Christian was if a person showed up on Wednesday night. That's just how I thought. Now, this was a really committed person, one that would come on Wednesday night with the smaller group. And then we had one service per year that was Maundy, Thursday, where in the Church of God we have communion, and then we actually recognize what Jesus did, and that was washing of the feet of his disciples. And so we traditionally have that in the Church of God. And that crowd that was 200 on Sunday, now on Maundy, Thursday was like 10. And in my mind, these people were like straight shot to heaven. I mean, they were like related to Billy Graham. The interesting thing was, though, it wasn't really, honestly, just my impressions as a kid. Because I got to listen to adults, and it's really like a lot of the adults thought that way also. And as a kid, I hadn't even thought through yet the fact that, well, not everybody can attend a 6 o'clock service. And there's some people that are doing family things that it's really important that they're doing that. And not everybody can attend Wednesday night. I mean, they're working or whatever. I hadn't really worked that through. But neither had many of the adults that I was around. And it wasn't just the 11 and the 6 and the 7 p.m. way of knowing how to decipher who's a Christian. It was things like clothing. There were certain types of clothing that if you wore the wrong thing, you obviously were not close to God. I mean, you obviously were not committed to God. I realized I could wear jeans for the 6 p.m. service and jeans for the 7 o'clock because the youth weren't in the prayer service. But if you wore jeans on Sunday morning, you obviously did not know God like someone else who didn't wear jeans on Sunday morning. And all I say is like, look at me now. It's like, oh man, if Jesus would come back right now. And hair. I grew up just after the hippie movement. But there were still a lot of hippies. And so the hair for men tended to be pretty long. And there was a clear distinction among the adults as to what hair length you could have and be close to God or not as a young man. And obviously, music. There was certain music that made you more of a Christian and made you less of a Christian. And we're not necessarily even talking lyrics, we're talking just the beat. And then you knew, among the adults I was around, you knew that someone was close to God if at a restaurant they bowed their head and they prayed before the meal. You just knew this was like Mother Teresa. I mean, these people were close to God. You knew this. And I don't really even want to get into playing cards, but you definitely knew who was a Christian by the type of cards they played, the card games they played. You just knew. Rummy was out because Rummy used the same kind of cards that people use to play poker with. The very same cards. Or like blackjack with the very same cards. And so if you could use that for poker, you should not use them for a game like Rummy or any other game that uses cards like that. And so when me and my friends would really want to live on the edge of darkness, I bought a set of poker chips. And we weren't gambling or anything. Just playing the game, poker, and using the chips, as a way to bid and stuff. But man, were we not Christians during those moments. It was always confusing to me because there were people in the church, there was a game called Rook. And I don't know if that's a localized game like in the area I lived or if that's an actual game that is played other places, but there's such things as Rook cards. And they don't look like the regular cards you play poker with, but they feel like it and they're cards. And you actually bid on rounds and so forth, almost like one would bid with chips like in poker, but no. But Christians, it was okay to play Rook, but it was sinful to play Rummy. Now, in the days of Jesus walking this earth, there were also ways that you knew one was a believer, a very good believer, and one who wasn't so good of a believer. And it wasn't 11 o'clock and 6 p.m. and 7 Wednesday night service or cards or hair, but instead it had to do with three things. And there were more, but there were three big things where you knew somebody was a believer or not. And that had to do with alms, which we'll talk about more, which is the giving to those less fortunate. Had to do with prayer, and it had to do with fasting. So let's go through these briefly. The giving of alms. The Jewish faith, and for that matter, Scripture in general, from the very beginning, speaks very strongly about the fact that we need to be careful to do things and to help people with less money or who are in difficult situations in life. We need to make sure that as believers, we're careful to help out. It's just our command. And so the giving of alms was something that they would do, or the giving of to the poor when they would come to the temple to worship or to the synagogue. That's what they would do. And Jesus now gives a warning in this Sermon on the Mount that we're talking about in this series. He gives a warning to the people. And he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness or to practice what you believe is good and holy as a believer. Be careful to not practice that in front of others to be seen by them. This is not to say that you can't ever do something that is right in front of people, but be careful of the attitude of doing it in order to be seen by them. Because if you do, Jesus says, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. In other words, God sees through that stuff. If you come to church on 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock because you think that makes you a better believer, and you're not coming just for the sake of coming to worship God, but you come because you think that puts you in a better status than other less Christians, then God sees right through that, and God's not interested in that. Now, by the way, if you look at this picture, there's a great story. You can look at it later. It's the widow's mite, where she gives all she had, and it was just a mite, or kind of like a penny. That's all she had to give to the poor, and she gave that. But also in this picture is one who's known as a Pharisee, and it's hard to tell, but there's a little bag underneath there at the bottom, and this bag for the Pharisee would have been full of coins because they saved up their coins and their giving for these moments to be able to give in front of other people. And this brass shaped vessel there that he's got his hands on was known as a trumpet because it's shaped like a trumpet. And it was just known as a trumpet. And what these Pharisees would do is that they would fill a bag of coins and they would come publicly when everybody was watching and they would dump this bag of coins and it would go clank, 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 clank. And it would get the attention of people, and people would say, my, what a great believer he is in God, because he gives so much to the poor. And so Jesus goes on in this sermon in Matthew 6:2, and he says, so when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. In other words, they got a reward out of that. They felt great when everybody was oohing and awing at what a great believer was in their midst. Everybody was so impressed. That was their reward, and they're not going to get anything from God for that hypocrisy. So giving of alms was one of those ways in that day that you knew somebody was close to God, and another was praying. These Pharisees, who, by the way, were the religious leaders of the day, they were the teachers. They were like the ministers of the day, and they were hypocrites. And they would go to crowded street corners, or they would go into the synagogues, and they would stand and pray, and they would raise their hands before God, and they would have these long prayers, with these great introductions and these great endings, and it would be like a prepared speech that they were giving to impress other people. And so Jesus says in this same sermon, just right after that last statement, he says, "And when you pray, do not pray like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full." They got what they came for, but they're not getting anything else from God. And one of the other primary ways that you knew somebody was a strong believer was that if they would fast. Now, fasting is a biblical practice that people have done throughout all the days of the Bible, and it's where you choose to go without something that is valuable and that you normally depend on. You choose to go without that, and in most instances, and especially in this day, that had to do with food. You would choose to fast from food. And whenever you would have the hunger pains, it would just cause you to, to think more of God, and that would be a reason that you should pray and just get closer to God. And you were giving up something to surrender that to God and be in a position of surrender. But the Pharisees now, they fasted also, and they fasted to be seen by other people. Now, when they fasted, they would disfigure their faces, and what this means is that they would put some type of makeup on their face that would make their faces look pale. And in this way, Jesus says they disfigure their faces. And when they would look pale in public, and by the way, they would fast on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every Tuesday and every Thursday, people knew that the Pharisees would fast. And they fasted supposedly for the sins of other people. They were fasting for the sins of Israel. And so it was like they're saying, we are so spiritual, we're going to take on all the sins of our nation, all the sins of the people around us, and we're going to fast. We're going to bring those before God every Tuesday and every Thursday. And so whenever you saw a Pharisee on Tuesdays or Thursdays, you would be reminded that this is a person who is suffering for God, because they would look pale, like they had been without food for so long. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face. By the way, this oil is it's a liquid that would be similar to cologne for men, or aftershave, something that would make your body smell good, or perfume for a woman. And it's saying, when you fast, put on a little cologne so that others have no reason to think that you're going through a hard time. Put on some cologne. Wash your face. Don't put on that makeup, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. There's three things in common in these passages and in my experiences as a kid, and that is something good became offensive to God. It's not bad to go to church at 11 o'clock, and it's not bad to go at 6 or 7 or Monday, Thursday. It's not bad. That's a good thing. And it's certainly not bad to pray, and it's certainly not bad to give to the poor. And it's certainly not bad to fast. All of these things are biblical and needed. But here's the thing, something that was good, actually good in a person's life, became offensive to God. And that's the scary part. That's the tricky part. Something that actually started off good ends up twisted. And in each passage, Jesus talks clearly, and he just says that every time they got their reward, but they're not getting any reward from God for that. Each time it says, if you came to church at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night and you were coming just to be seen by others so that other people would think you're such a wonderful example as a Christian, then whatever you get out of that, that's all you're going to get. God's not going to listen to anything that you have to offer because God's not interested in hypocrisy. And in each passage, Jesus uses the word or form of it, hypocrite. And this is a very strong word for Jesus to use. The people that Jesus got most upset at in his ministry were religious people who faked their faith and were hypocrites. That's who Jesus gets angry at, are hypocrites. So this is a very strong word. Look quickly again, just a reminder of this passage that started it all with. Jesus says, be careful, believers, not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. And this is the tricky part about this, and that is that there could be something that you do every week. There could be something you're doing right now that is a good thing, but it has been distorted, and it no longer really is a good thing, but it partially is about you being seen by other people so that it makes you look good. And that is called using God to look good. 2 questions now as I wrap this up. And the first one is this: do you use God to look good? I know that's a hard one. I know it's so hard, but is there anything that you do in your life that's a good thing, and it started off good for you, but it's become routine for you, and it's just really something that you do now because you're supposed to do it, because that's what a believer is supposed to do, and in reality, when you do it, it makes you feel better about you because you look better than those other people who don't do it. Is there anything in your life that has become distorted, that you do it more for a show? And then secondly, as I close, why did Jesus mention this topic? On the left of the picture is this constant reminder in this series that these people are going through a hard time. The Romans have overtaken the world. The Romans have made their life miserable. The Romans have really caused so much turmoil in their society that what used to be good now is bad, and what bad is good. It's all of this weird stuff going on in their world. It's such a tough time. And Jesus, though, decides to talk about hypocrisy because, in essence, he's saying, if your faith is no deeper than just showing up to church because you're supposed to, that's not going to be enough during this time that you're going through. Some of you right now might even have experienced in this time of difficulty in our nation and the difficulty that you go through as a person. Some of you, over the years, maybe your faith in God is not as genuine as it used to be, and it's become just more of a routine and a pattern. And you're realizing now that it's really not working that well, and it could be because you have a shallow faith. You have a shallow experience with God that is most of all based on what you should do to look and behave as a good Christian, but not because you're just merely doing it out of a love and sacrifice and pure surrender to God. And so right now you realize, hey, I'm not feeling it. It's not working for me. And that's because it's too shallow to work. And this time we'll bring it out. Is there something that perhaps you need to rethink about as well as me, where Jesus is saying your faith needs to grow up so that you can start to be the adult in the room?